Yes, hello. So, the topic free education versus social requirement is considerable and in some parts abstract. For this presentation, I focused on two main topics: accessibility's barriers, which works against free education for all, and the linking of economic interests, which changes the way we see and live education in Germany. This is a neoliberal thinking, the best answer for social requirement, but this should be challenged as well. Yes, I'm a student, so I often talk about we or us, but I mean students, so that this is clear. And I use some abstract and political words. If you have any questions or if it's not understandable, please just raise your arms and I try to explain them again. And first of all, I'm sorry for all the mistakes I'm going to make because English is not my favorite language, but I hope it's understandable. So, how education is seen. We as students are seen as human capital. University is seen as a place to prepare us for business life, as fast as possible, as good as possible. So the main reason to study seems to be just working and owning money. And not forget, education is seen as a competition. It's not enough to be good in what you do, it's important to be one of the best. This leads to a society which is working against each other and not with each other. So social requirement is linked with the logic of utilization. In further slides, I will call this markt-oriented. So how does this markt-orientation education works? The goal of markt-orientation education is to focus at the best of the best students. So before finding the best of the best, the discrimination starts. The German system of education is one of the most discriminatory systems in the European Union if you focus to social standard. The success in school depends to a high grade to the social background of your parents. So if your parents have been to a higher education like university, it's more likely that you yourself go to university. If your parents had no higher education, there's a big possibility for you not to go to university. Further on, there are, for example, still typical male and female subjects. Here we see how society forms pupils and students and their interests. These typical role standards are discriminating for male and female as well. But if we look the higher standard, or as higher the standard of academic level is, the more men and the less women are represented. So these are just a few examples. There are much more topics where we can see missing of gender equality in education system. Especially for foreigners, there are big barriers. For example, if you didn't finish school in an European Union country, you have to ensure that you have a determined amount of money on your bank account. Some graduations are not seen as equal as German or European graduations, so some people have to take part in a so-called Studienkolleg for 1 or 2 years to be able to study in a university. The biggest discrimination in education is for refugees without the right of asylum, so-called geduldet, or for asylum seekers. The asylum laws are just going to be changed So these groups aren't allowed to study at all. Although most of the universities are meanwhile without physical barriers for handicapped persons, psychological and social difficulties are ignored, so they get discrimination every day. Altogether, we see a lot of obstacles of participation for groups and individuals. If we talk about marked orientation education, it is also important to mention how individual necessities, speed, and abilities are ignored. Education is not seen as the big possibility it is to develop your personality. So being under pressure to perform leads us as students and society to forget about our interests. But it's important how education could be. And in my opinion, it could and it should be so much more. At first, we have to remember that education is a human right. To implement this, to make education open for everyone, there are a lot of steps to go. First of all, we have to lowering the bar of participation. Discrimination after unchangeable futures, like gender, religion, where you're from, is the biggest reason for a not open education system. Further on, education should be aligned to individual needs. Now it's the other way around. We need to remember that studying is, at first, for yourself. Then you can think about what to do and which way to go. Further on, we have to find ways to close financial gaps for students, for example, higher and better BAföG. I would like now to talk about obstacles of participation in Germany. And here I would like to point out the economic factor. Especially in the last years, the cost to study raises. The biggest parts belong to higher rents. Of course, BAföG helps a lot of students to get through studies, but it's still exclusive. It depends on the money of the parents, it forces to stay in time, and it's not flexible and up to date about the real costs in some cities. So by starting a study, you start to be in debt. Moreover, there are still fees to pay every semester. There are books, excursions, equipment. After all, studying is expensive. So many students work besides studying, but this leads towards grace and maybe more time than it is scheduled. In Germany, there are also some hard quotes for accreditation. These quotes start in a good intention, but as long as some groups are treated another way than others, this is the base of discrimination. It's also critical that these quotes are hard. They don't change, but they don't change for other surroundings. Yes, obstacles of participation in Leuphana Uni. Yes. You, as new students at Leuphana University, just passed the admission process at Leuphana. Congrats for this. And at first sight, this maybe seems to be a good way to overcome with grades. But if you think about whose parents are able to pay such a trip like during school, which costs nearly 10,000 euro for half a year, you can guess that there is again a privilege for potential students with a higher social standard in their background. Also, the number of pupils, students doing social or political work is bigger with a higher standard. Pupils with a lower social standard mostly start earlier to work in a mini job, because their parents can't afford as much as in other families. So the time is more little to take part in social or political proceedings. So all of you were able to pass these obstacles, but other people didn't. So I already talked a little bit about market-orientated conditions in German universities, but I want to go a little bit deeper. The beginning of bachelor and master system due to Bologna process was an answer to the economy. Its goal still is to have, on the one hand, better prepared and on the other hand also younger manpower. So students should learn more in shorter time and should be more specialized. Through this progress and worse paid education system, economic enterprises start to intervene in education and research. This is one point. The second, long-term tuition fees. In Lower Saxony, we still have long-term tuition fees. You can see them as pure sanctions to students who are not able to or not interested in getting ready as it's told. This leads to double problems for some students. They don't receive BAföG anymore, they have to pay more, so they have to work more, and so they can study less. Further on, the number of long-term students is not noticeable bigger in states without long-term tuition fees. Also, in last years, universities were changed. They should work more like companies. So an extra management system, the so-called Hochschulrat, was established. People who aren't really affected decide for people who are affected. This reduced the democracy in university and started to form education into a product. German-wide and statewide, there are a lot of competitions for university. Their success ordains how much money they get. So it's a bartering, efficiency against money. In conclusion, we have a big rivalry between different universities. But unfortunately, all this makes us forget about the other assignment of universities. So where we can see the market-orientated conditions here at Leuphana University. First of all, Leuphana University is a foundation. In 2005, some initial public universities become foundations. This means that the universities are not paid by public, so Lower Saxony or Germany, but by enterprises. This minimized the independence of universities and research. Universities, as a foundation, are more depending to the goals of enterprises than public universities. This is a big incision in the freedom of science and teaching. And here I found some statements from the homepage of Leuphana University, and they perfectly show the intention of Leuphana University, preparing students as so-called manpower for business world. So, conclusion. If we see free education as the biggest goal, we have to come to the conclusion that this system today, especially as we are talking about foundation, totally fails. If we want everybody to be able to study, and not everybody to study, this is always a little bit difficult, we have to find new ways of how universities should work. We have to fight against discrimination and to overcome barriers. So, thank you for listening, and never forget, education is a fundamental right, and society tends to turn accessibility barriers invisible to those who are not affected by them. So which means if you say, me as a woman, I don't feel discriminated, It doesn't mean that nobody of the woman is discriminated. So thank you.
So thank you very much for inviting me here for the debate. And it was a very interesting talk I just listened to, thank you. And I will make a very fundamental point towards this dilemma between free educational choice versus social expectations, because I think we have to look at, very deeply. No reasonable person or no reasonable society, I suggest, would expect you to do a specific education for a certain specific job. For example, one would not expect you to become a teacher in Latin or an engineer of power horses, no whether you are interested in it or not. Clearly, if you don't like engineering or calculating, you will be a bad engineer, we won't use your bridges. And there is no social need for bad engineers. It makes no sense to force someone to do a certain education or to force someone to do a certain job. I remind you that already the free choice of work is fixed in Article 12 of our fundamental law in Germany. Alle Deutschen haben das Recht, Beruf, Arbeitsplatz und Ausbildungsstätte frei zu wählen. Possibly, there are some people out there who believe it would be appropriate to force young people to do a certain education which is seen by them as useful, e.g. become an engineer or a surgeon. Such a position is against law, I just quoted Article 12, against human nature because we are driven by interest and curiosity, and is against the achievements of civilization. I won't consider it in my present talk any longer, because that's not a position that is really useful within the debate. Rather, I suppose the dilemma we are talking about is about another concern, namely the question whether studying humanity is useful. This is what people worry about, so viele Geisteswissenschaftler. By having free choice, some of you have chosen to study humanities without considering what is needed in a job. And you did a good job for your choice. This is the accusation that we hear sometimes in society. Then the question at issue is whether higher education in humanities is useful for a society. And I believe it is useful. And I will make you the argument that goes beyond economic reasoning. And by consequence, there is a way out of the dilemma. Whatever you study, your education can contribute to society. I will explain. There is a difference between social expectations and social needs. Many expectations are restricted to economic benefit. We hear always these economic arguments. But society needs all other aspects, cultural ones, aesthetic ones, and simply the human benefit for every one of you sitting here. One good example is the present refugee challenge. We cannot manage it by pure economic or political activity. It needs the heart and the activity of the people. Otherwise, you would not discover the problem. Thus, the education I'm talking about does not focus on economical benefit. And I can show it you in many respects for Leuphana. Rather, it can be taken as a preparation for human's life. you should be ready to liberate you from a pure economic concern and to ask what your creativity and expertise can contribute to in science, arts, and the whole society. There are competencies that are relevant for many areas of life. I shall give you examples. The ability to take on responsibility is required in professional life with no doubt, but it's also required to engage already at university, in civil society, and to help others in daily life when help is needed. The same can be said with respect to the following. But where in higher education do you learn to discuss and to analyze? If higher education is ready to do so in one word, you will do it in humanities. How in higher education do you learn to engage? By being concerned with real problems within our society. You are just doing it at the moment. How will you be able to convince people of what has to be done? By profound knowledge and by your expertise in some. What we need for higher education that aims at responsible activity at work and in civil society is to combine management, engineering, medicine, teacher education with humanities and with projects that are part of real life world. You will have the possibility to do so, for example, after your Leuphana semester in the conference week. However, I have to rule out a misunderstanding. I do not claim that this kind of responsible behavior and expertise can only be acquired by higher education. This is a mistake. Universities aren't the only place to educate yourself. It's a good place, I'm convinced, but it's not the only place. Because what universities do offer is only a certain approach to expertise, to behavior, to leadership, and so on. There are many alternative ways to be successful in a job or to be a good citizen who engage in civil society. You don't need higher education. Higher education at university is not the only way, but a very good way to achieve these purposes. It will never be suitable for everyone and every university for everyone. And it does not need to be so because there are lots of alternatives to achieve the same aim. But every model of education, I believe, should be concerned with the question what it may contribute to society. And there we have some deficits for sure within the German system. Therefore, higher education has to be concerned with these questions, and we try to do so at our university. If there is a way to combine expertise with skills that are taught by the humanities, I believe that the dilemma we are discussing here this afternoon can be resolved. You will be able to study whatever you want if you do it in your way, and that means if you are interested in both in expertise and considering real problems of the world. I'm sure that in the end you are able to take responsibility and to engage in your job as well as in society. Note the difference between social expectations and real needs of society. If you learn how to analyze and to object prejudice, if you learn why research sometimes is a very, unpredictable way, and goes a lot of curves and takes a lot of time. This will help you to discover the problems, and you will possibly not meet social expectations. You have to be strong enough that you are willing sometimes not to meet social expectations, because then you will be stronger to contribute to society, which should be a civilized and enlightened society that needs critical discussion. So I will sum up with 4 points of liberty. You are free to decide whether you want to go to university or not. You are free to choose what to study. You are free to choose the way of studying, and a good way will liberate you from social expectations by aid of academic research. And by studying the right way, you will be experts in your field and in life with many options after university. These liberties won't hinder you to contribute to society if you want to. Quite the contrary, they will enable you to contribute to society according to your personal abilities. And this would be what society needs. So a very fundamental argument for our debate. Thank you very much.